I'm trying to understand how life is within my grasp.
Okay, so in order to explain what UVs are and how they work, gonna have to explain the basic building blocks of 3D, beforehand, so that you can really understand what's going on. The basic building block of everything 3D is called a vertex, and a vertex is more than just the dot that you see on the screen in your 3D modeling program. It's actually a struct. And as a struct, it carries multiple types of data in it. And my computer's, there we go. So you have a vertex, and the primary thing that it carries is that vertex's 3D location in the world. And this is your game level, or your 3D rendering scene, or your world, whatever you want to call it. But this is the universal coordinate set. Um, then comes what we're interested in, and that's your UV coordinate. Well, it's actually a list of UV coordinates, and that's a little bit complicated, but for now, let's just think of this as our UV coordinates. I'll get into why there's a list before the end of the video, I think. And then there's other data that's packed into the vertex as well, and I just listed some of it, and I mean some of it, because, so you can see that there's all sorts of stuff. And not every vertex is going to have all of these things. If it's not an animated something or other, it won't have bones. And if it doesn't have bones, it won't need a bone weighting list, for example. If it's just a vertex and it doesn't have any faces, attached to it, then there's no need for a per face normal list, etc., etc., etc. And so these things, if there's no texture image on it, then it's not going to need UV coordinates. So, as you can see, what's in a vertex changes depending on what that vertex is being used for. And that makes vertexes very, very handy and flexible. And when you're actually programming your own shaders, the fact that you can vary what goes into a vertex and how it's handled by the graphics card is a tremendously powerful thing. But for our purposes right now, we're mostly, focusing on Blender and UE. So all we mostly need to worry about will be these and this. That's most of it right there. But for this discussion, we're right here with the UV coordinates. And the main thing to take away from this is that each vertex has a 3D coordinate and it has 2D coordinates as well. And these are not the same coordinate systems. They're completely separate. Totally different worlds. One is your world, one is your UV world. Okay? So one's a 3D world and one's a 2D world. So, blam, we have a face. Now, look at it, you see these dots at each one of the corners. What this is a graphing of the 3D coordinate sets in our 4 vertexes. So this vertex right here is at -1x, -1y, 0z. And this one is at +1x, -1y, +1x, +1y, -1x, +1y, all of them at 0z. So if I grab them and drag them in the z dimension, you see our z has changed. And now our plane is up above the grid. And that's altering the 3D dimensions. So now let's create and right now these vertexes in our face here, they don't have any 2D dimensions attached to them. All they have is the 3D. So what we're going to do is we're going to close that window, and we're going to split this window sideways, and we're going to make out of this a UV image editor. There we go. So this is the window that we need in order to, well, actually, I don't know if you can unwrap with it. I'm getting off subject. So this window over here shows us our 3D world. This window over here shows us our 2D world. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, with everything selected over here, I want to hit U, unwrap, and there's our 4 vertexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, in our 2D world. So what just happened is in our struct, we just added a UV coordinate list to each of the vertexes that we just unwrapped. So in reality, the action of unwrapping is just sticking a coordinate list, sticking extra data into our vertexes. Okay, that's what unwrapping does. And you can see that data. That's the data that we just stuck in for that vertex, that vertex, that vertex, that vertex. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open an image that I conveniently placed on the desktop. If I click on desktop, Boom. And as you'll notice, it resized the canvas and kept our points at the corners. Um, that's a pretty handy little trick. So clearly, there's still something missing. We don't have our object there. Nope, nope, look at that. Nothing, nothing. Nope, okay. And here's why. We need a material. So what we're going to do, bounce those back and forth, and turn this into a node editor. And one note before I do this. This object is selected in this window. It's unwrapped to this window. But whatever you have selected over here, it's going to be reflected in every other window that you have open. So when we come over here and just click new, if I can get it to bring up, there we go, add new material. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this texture here that we're using in this image editor, and we're going to add that image to a material and apply that material to our surface. But actually we're doing it kind of backwards because we have the surface. And by doing this, we're applying the material, and now we're going to add the texture. So we add a texture, and it's an image texture. Drop it in there, and this is why I was scrunching that down right there. Now we can zoom in. We open the same image. And plug it in, color to color. Yeah. So now we have our texture put into a material. The material is applied to the object. So now we have to do is leave solid mode and go to material mode, and blam! There's our image. Now you'll notice that the perspective is, or the scaling is different. You know, this is obviously letterbox, and this is square, and it's pinched to make it fit. The reason that happens, the way that happens, is a process called rasterization that goes on in your graphics card. It's part of the rendering pipeline. It's actually part of the transition between the 3D process that goes on the vertex side and the 2D process that goes on the fragment shape. Okay, that's the other name. Yeah. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, rasterization, without getting too deep into it, what it amounts to is there are 1,368, I think, pixels along this top line on our image. And the UV address for this vertex, which is also this vertex, this is just the 3D address of that vertex. So the 2D address of this is at the corner. The 2D address of this one, which is this one, is at the corner. So it knows that when it goes to draw the texture onto our face, it knows how many fragments, how many texels, which are basically virtual pixels. That's about the best way to think of them. So it knows how many texels it has between these two, and it knows how many pixels it has between these two, and it just does the math and makes a conversion. So if this is 3 times longer than this, if there's 3 times as many pixels in this as there are texels in this, then for the first texel here, it reads the first 3 pixels here. It takes the colors, mixes them together to make a single color, and that's the color that it writes to that texel. And when we do this, the number of texels in that line change. When we do this, the number of texels in that line changes. But this doesn't. See, the conversion math, now maybe it's taking like 15 pixels from our image, making that into one color and writing it into that texel. And it's doing that all the way across in both directions to get us an image that scales and transforms according to the 3D manipulations that are being put on these vertexes. So I can grab one of these and it reacts just almost exactly like you would expect it to, as far as the way that it draws the picture, the texture, to the object. You can also in this window, you can edit the 2D dimensions for each vertex, which allows you to do some, fun stuff. But here you can really see the rasterizer earning its bread and butter. Okay, now what's going on here is we have undestroyed image over here because it's reading from this area. As it rasterizes, it's reading along this line, and that line is not distorted, so it gives us a nice clean line of pixels. And as you go over and keep reading, eventually this line is equal to this line, or I should say this line is equal to this line segment. So for every pixel, as it rasterizes, every pixel is going to have these same colors all the way across. That's why you get this striping effect, and the same thing at the bottom, obviously. Because for every pixel that it reads out towards, this way, it's still reading that same single pixel. Once you give it a little bit more space to work with, it's a very gradual thing, but eventually when you get it into a perfectly straight line, it shoots those pixels all the way out. And that's because all we're doing is changing where it reads from, when it draws those little lines. Okay, so I promised to explain about the UV coordinate lists, and I almost forgot. Glad I checked myself. So what we're going to do is we're just going to delete this object. Blammo. And yeah, that can stay. And we're going to add a Q. Okay. Oh, haha. I moved my cursor way out in the middle of nowhere. Okay. Now we're going to add a Q. Alright, and now we're going to get our cursor back at it. Alright. And we're going to unwrap this cube. Now, this is a more complex unwrap than our little plane. So I'm going to step you through it nice and easy, explaining as I go. Obviously, this doesn't just transfer onto a 2D plane like that, So we're going to have to manipulate it and massage the 3D around so that so that Blender knows how we want it arranged onto our 2D mapping. So basically, what we want to do is we want to look at our object. It's a cube, right? And we want to figure out how we can lay this thing flat. You could smash it down flat and try and do something like that. But the easiest thing to do, the thing that gives you the best results in the end, is to take and cut our cube. So, for example, take this side right here. We would want this side to flop down flat. And if we keep doing that, we flop this side down flat, we flop this side down flat, and then we would just be left with this side and this side sticking up, and we can just flop both of them down flat. So you could like rotate that down, and then you would have a flat edge here and then a flat edge sticking up, and then you rotate that edge down, and we would have basically a cross. Be long down here, short, and then the head of the cross up there. And that would be our object laid out flat. So the way we do that is we come down here to edge select, and we select the edges that we would need to cut in order to make that happen. So right click, shift right click, and that'll flop that one down. And we shift right click, and cutting along those edges will let this one flop down. And shift right click, that would let this one flop down. And we don't need to make any more cuts for this one to be able to flop down. And that is literally exactly what Blender will do. Okay, so we hit E, I think? No, that was extrude. Control E. Yeah, there we go. And we want to mark all those selected edges. So you Control E for the edge specials. We want to mark those as seams. Which, I don't know, seems a little backwards to me. You should mark them as cuts. A seam is where you put two cuts together. Whether you're welding or sewing or you know, everything else in the world, if you have a seam, it's where you put two edges together. We're going to cut these. So that's basically the exact opposite of a seam. But whatever. Okay. So, A, and now you can see, even with nothing selected, our seams are marked because they're red instead of orange. And now, I don't know if you still have to go into face select mode, but you know, I used to. It's a habit. I'm going to do it. And then A to select everything again. And then U to unwrap. And since we did our seaming and stuff, we don't have to mess with any of these. So we can just hit unwrap. And if we come over here, there is our UV map in our UV window. And of course we still got the same texture, you know, same material applied, so it just maps it right to. Yeah, okay. So this area, see, that's our map right there. That runs around the bottom. So this side over here will be the side of her head, yeah. And then our two ends. There's the table and him. Milk carries on. Yep, pretty sweet. Okay, so I was talking about, well, I promised I was going to explain the UV list rather than just having a single UV. And with our plane, you know, when we just had one face, all we had was one UV coordinate for each vertex. But now, here's what I want you to think about. Wrap your head around this. Let me find, yeah, there we go. This vertex right here. Okay. That is that corner. Right. So if we take a look at that corner from this angle, and do that again. Now, that's one vertex with three faces, right? So look what happens if we grab this vertex. See, there it is at another face. And if we grab this vertex, oops. Oh, no, sorry, it's this vertex. Okay, see? So, this, the vertex that owns that, I'm in face select mode. There we go. The vertex that owns this 3D address also has this 2D address, this 2D address, and this 2D address in it. And that's what's in its vertex list. So you have to be able to do that so that you can lay your, your UV map out. And that's why a UV map list for each vertex instead of just a single UV map. And in, really complex situations, you can have one vertex with like 15, 20, 30 different UV coordinates in its list. And that's how that works. And I think that pretty much covers UV, the theory behind UV maps. I'm probably going to go ahead and do another video covering the actual process of UV unwrapping, which is really an art. And in that one, I'll go into detail as to, all the buttons I'm pushing and exactly how everything should be done to get proper results. The things to look out for, all the, artistic side of things. But, yeah, I think that does it for today. Well, hope you got something out of that.